at expressvpn.com/Thom. And TEEF, TEEF, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teefhealth.com, code THOM. These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CarShield, America's #1 auto protection company.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Under the Influence, Putting Peer Pressure to Work by Robert H. Frank. And I'm reading from the prologue. That we are more closely connected to one another than most of us realize is an old idea. An important variation dates from 1929, when Hungarian writer Frigyes Karinthy published a short story entitled Chains. Two of the story's main characters speculate that any two living people can be connected by a chain involving no more than 5 acquaintances. That some such chains exist is hardly surprising, since most of us can think of people in distant locations to whom we're connected through a small number of intermediaries. The man bites dog aspect of Karinthy's conjecture is that almost any two people, A and E, could be linked by a chain like A knows B, B knows C, C knows D, who knows E. One of the first systematic attempts to test this claim came in the 1960s with a series of experiments by the psychologist Stanley Milgram. In it, he sent packages containing a small booklet to 96 people chosen at random from the Omaha, Nebraska telephone directory. His cover letter asked them to try to forward the booklet to a specific residence of Boston, Massachusetts, through a chain of personal acquaintances. He told them the name and address of the Boston resident, that he worked as a stockbroker, and that the first person in their chain should be somebody they knew on a first-name basis. Milgram also advised them to choose someone they believed, presumably based on the target's location and occupation, could be socially closer to the target than they were themselves. Subsequent recipients in the chain were asked to forward the same instructions. Many of the Omaha recipients undoubtedly tossed Milgram's booklet in the trash, so it's remarkable that the Boston target received 18 of the 96 packages. The average number of links in the 18 chains was 5.9. But the now familiar expression 6 degrees of separation would not gain broad currency until many years later, when John Guare's play by that name premiered on Broadway in 1990. The concept became a meme in full when 4 Albright College students introduced 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon in 1994, a game designed to measure the professional proximity of an actor, living or dead, to the American film star Kevin Bacon. An actor has a Bacon number of 1, for example, if he or she appeared in the same film with Bacon. Someone who appeared in a film with another actor who appeared in a film with Bacon has a Bacon number of 2, and so on. The average Bacon number is 2.95 among actors who have one. In that group, even the actor most distant from Bacon, William Rufus Shafter, has a Bacon number of only 7. Shafter, a Union Army officer during the Civil War, appeared in 2 films in 1898. For academics who study social connectedness, the 6 degrees concept gained little traction until 1998. That's when the sociologist Duncan Watts and the mathematician Steve Straga published their landmark paper, Collective Dynamics of Small World Networks in Nature. In the years since then, this paper has provided the mathematical foundation for the analytical tools that social scientists have been using with such remarkable success to study how ideas and behaviors spread through populations like infectious diseases. It has already been cited by other scholars more than 38,000 times and is one of the few papers ever published to be among the most widely cited works in multiple disciplines. In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, which Webster now defines as an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. The meme is to cultural transmission, Dawkins argued, as the gene is to biological transmission. One of Charles Darwin's central insights was that natural selection favors genetic variations that enhance the individual organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Much of the time, the same variations also benefit larger groups, but often not. For example, an inclination to cheat when no one's looking might benefit individuals, but widespread cheating almost always makes matters worse for groups. It is the same with memes. The memes that propagate most successfully are often ones that benefit both individuals and groups. But here too, not always. As the legal scholar Jeffrey Stake has argued, ideas should not be treated as inert products, but as living things that sometimes exert some influence over their environment. Some of the ideas are more adept at surviving than others, and the ones that survive will not necessarily be good for humans. It is often hard to evaluate whether a specific behavior even qualifies as a meme, and if so, whether its consequences on balance are positive or negative. Yet sometimes the evidence is clear. We know, for example, that the strongest predictor of whether people will take up smoking is the proportion of their close friends who smoke. Smoking is thus clearly a meme. The negative health consequences of smoking are also conclusively documented, and most smokers themselves express regret over having started. By definition, then, smoking unambiguously qualifies as a socially destructive meme. On the other side of the ledger, we have compelling evidence that the adoption of photovoltaic solar panels is both socially contagious and almost uniformly positive in terms of environmental consequences. Accordingly, few would object to calling the practice a socially beneficial meme. Adam Smith, widely considered the father of economics, is often cited in defense of the claim that competitive markets produce the greatest good for the greatest number.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So is every single part of Donald Trump's presidency a con job, just like apparently every single part of his life? I mean, he swindled his father's estate out of $400 million and turned himself into a phony billionaire. And now we all know that that was just a con. The Trump administration, according to today's New York Times, is leaning on the Centers for Disease Control to come up with any reason, no matter how thin or meaningless or even, stretching the truth, just to open the schools. And now we know that was all a con, and probably a con to try to save Donald Trump's failing hotel businesses, because the entire hotel industry is in trouble because the economy is closed functionally. And so, hey, if we can do like, Ron DeSantis just did in Florida and open everything, then you can go back to your hotel and you can go back to Mar-a-Lago and Donald Trump can make money again. And you can go back to the Doral in Florida and Donald Trump can make money there too. 200,000 Americans are dead, and 7.1 million now have a pre-existing condition that the insurance companies, after Auntie Amy gets done with them in a month or so, the insurance companies will be able to say, no, we're not going to treat you for your, for the stroke you just had because, it's a side effect of having had COVID, and that's a pre-existing condition. Donald Trump assured us that everything was just fine. This virus is going to disappear like a miracle. That was a con. Trump insists that the forest fires that we're having in Oregon and California and Washington State, well, actually it's 12 western states now, the two states that were hit the worst, California and Oregon, that was because we weren't raking our forests, honest to God. And he says that it was the president of Finland who told him that, and the president of Finland says, no, that's a lie, I never said that. It was all a con. Trump says he's going to bring our jobs home, right? He campaigned on this. We're going to bring the factories back. Actually, factories have been closing and moving overseas throughout his presidency. I mean, yeah, he threw a couple cheap and easy tariffs on some Chinese goods, which wiped out our farmers. And then he had to bail them out with some, socialism. But actually, our trade deficit with China right now is worse than when Trump came into office. And he's still making his products in China, including his maggot hats. It was all a con. Trump claims he's worth $10 billion. And now we find out he's massively in debt. And he's been relying on foreign criminals to support his lifestyle and credit. He borrowed $100 million about 10 years ago against Trump Tower, the only asset that he has that actually was making money, and hasn't paid a penny of it off. He's been living on that $100 million that he borrowed for the last decade. It was all a con. His administration is arguing in front of the Supreme Court a week after the election that Obamacare should be dumped because it's unconstitutional. And he's saying, as he's been saying for 5 years now, he's going to replace it with something better, bigger, and cheaper. It's all a con. If such a thing existed, other countries would have done. Oh, single payer? No, he's not going to do that. He handed $2 trillion to America's wealthiest people with his tax cut in 2017. Although his followers and the people who watch Fox News think that average working people got most of that money, but the fact is it was all just a con. He took over $1 million from Turkey last year. And when Turkish President Erdogan demanded that the United States withdraw our troops from Syria so he could attack the Kurds, and if we didn't do that, Erdogan came right out and said, Donald Trump's got a couple of hotels here. I could change that. Trump rolled over and stabbed the Kurds in the back. Our allies, who'd put their lives on the line, were slaughtered because Donald Trump's pretend patriotism was a con. And although there's absolutely no evidence of voter fraud ever having changed an American election, and voting by mail is actually one of the most secure systems used all around the world, Donald Trump is trash-talking our election system so that when he tries to steal the presidency through the courts or Congress, people will be more accepting of it. And it's all a con. And now he's saying that we're soon going to have access to a wonderful vaccine. And America's praying it's not just another con. Is there any part of the Trump presidency that's not a con? What an amazing, amazing time we live in. We have the worst president in the history of the United States, a guy who literally is a con artist. He's a grifter and a con artist, has been his whole entire life. He's had two big infusions of cash. The $400 million that he stole from his father's estate, robbing his older brother and the estates of his siblings. And then he burned through that and ended up bankrupt. And so first started turning to, as his son Eric said, we don't need American banks. We get all the money we need from Russia. So he starts turning to foreign oligarchs for his money. And then he gets a gig with NBC that pays him $400 million, another $400 million, and he buys 15 hotel properties, golf courses around the world, and they're all losing money. This guy is absolutely broke. And now he is pushing really, really hard to open up the U.S. economy. There's no coronavirus. Everything is fine. You can go to the Trump Hotel D.C. You can go to Trump Hotel Las Vegas. You can go to Trump Mar-a-Lago. You can go to Trump Doral. Please. Your president needs you. He's running out of money. He's not sure how he's going to pay the $400 million in debt that he has that's coming due pretty soon. We actually don't know exactly when all of it's coming due because we don't know who he owes the money to. Does he owe it to Deutsche Bank? And if so, why did Justice Kennedy's son, who was his private personal banker at Deutsche Bank, this is the guy that I think should be testifying before Congress. At the top of my subpoena list would be Kennedy's son. But does he owe the money to Deutsche Bank? Does he owe it to Mohammed bin Salman? Is that why he's been sucking up to the Saudis ever since he won the election? Is it like Jared Kushner? He got some of the money from this fund that's heavily invested from Qatar or from UAE or elsewhere in the Middle East. I mean, who does he owe this money to, and what are they getting in exchange for it? Does he owe it to Russia? Is this why he won't criticize Putin? But he's not. I mean, he came out and said, he told Bob Woodward that he saved Mohammed bin Salman, the dictator of Saudi Arabia, that he saved his ass. That was his phrase to Bob Woodward. I saved his ass. Yeah. For what? How much money did you get out of that? Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see any aspect of his presidency that's not a con job. He's got lobbyists, industry lobbyists, in charge of virtually every federal agency. You got a defense lobbyist running the Defense Department. You got an oil lobbyist running the Interior Department. You got a coal lobbyist running the Environmental Protection Agency. You got a tax lobbyist running the IRS. It's mind-boggling. His entire presidency is a con job. And you got a bunch of, cokehead, as in Charles Koch, cokehead people like Mark Meadows now running the White House. These former members of Congress who are just total, and now this Judicial Crisis Network that poured millions into ads to get Brett Kavanaugh elected, now they're trying to do it for Auntie Amy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And meanwhile, he's sitting around laughing at evangelicals. I got to tell you about that. But anyhow, is there any part of his presidency that's not a con? Am I missing something here? And welcome back. It's amazing, isn't it? It's just amazing. Richard in Pasadena. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind?
What's on my mind is something somebody said yesterday about fix the Senate, and I know exactly how to do it. We take all those senators who take money from Big Pharma and the fossil fuel and NRA, we eliminate them. That leaves about 2 or 3 senators. We do the same thing in the House. We fix the House the same way. Now we've got about 60 or 70 people who don't take money from the big people. They become our Senate. What does that do? That eliminates the House, which means we represent ourselves. We become our own representative. We don't have to...
I'm listening, Richard.
You there?
Yeah.
Okay, so we take control of our government. We don't have to have a third person. Those honest people in Congress become our senators, and we tell them what to do, and then they let us know what is good.
So are you suggesting, Richard, that we should consider becoming a Greek-style democracy, and I'm talking 3,000 years ago Greek, where... Well, even that wasn't a direct democracy because although there was, as I recall, 6,000 people in the political body, maybe it was even 6,00001. But your name was drawn from, basically a lottery. I mean, it was like jury duty that you had to serve the government. Or are you suggesting direct democracy, or are you just speaking tongue-in-cheek here? I'm assuming the latter.
I'm saying instead of this Republican representative democracy, that we have a Republican democracy, which is the Senate, but what they didn't have is what we are doing right now, 186,000 mile per second communication. That's the difference. Every state can determine, people in each state can determine just by a phone call or an email or whatever, yay or nay. We have it available. This, and the first order of business of the Senate would be to open up that impeachment again on Trump and get him out of the White House immediately. I'm sure 100%.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I'm sure 100% of those senators would say, "Yeah, out of here."
Yeah, Dream on, Richard. I get what you're saying, but dream on, sadly. John in West Fork, Arkansas. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hi. It's my understanding that any senator can object to unanimous consent and shut down what's going on. My question
they don't shut it down. It just requires then a majority vote.
Okay.
Or a 60-person majority vote if it's something subject to a filibuster. So,
is unanimous consent usually part of the proceedings when they're holding hearings?
Yes. There are two strategies that the Democrats can use to slow this thing down. The first is objecting to unanimous consent. The second is basically denying a quorum. And I just don't think either one of them are going to get Democrats the kind of time that they need to push this back to the other side of the election. Mitch McConnell has gamed this thing out, and he's been doing it with the Senate parliamentarian for years. He knows what he's doing. So I'm not real optimistic about that one. John, thanks for the call. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmannReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmannReport.com. So nuclear power is being sold as the thing that's going to save us from climate change. It's not. Not only does it take mind-boggling amounts of carbon to even build a nuclear power plant, all that concrete, all that steel, all that stuff that has to be hauled in and transported, and then you got to mine the uranium, and then you got to ship it and all this kind of stuff. But now the industry is out with their hand out. 20 years ago, we subsidized the industry to the tune of $100 billion. And that's not the unquantifiable amount from the Price-Anderson Act, where we insure nuclear power plants as well. These are just subsidies. And now we've got a whole set of brand new subsidies that companies in New York and Ohio and Pennsylvania and New Jersey are coming to the ratepayers. It's mind-boggling. We've got a whole video about it, that lays out all the details for our supporters over at thomhartmann.com, and you can get over there and check it out. It's pretty amazing stuff. And nuclear power, no panacea. In fact, it's a big problem. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Welcome back. Oh, this is interesting. Donald Trump, this is a... let me find this here. It's McKay Coppins is writing in The Atlantic today about how Donald Trump is a big fan of the televangelists. A former campaign advisor recalled showing his boss, that would be Donald Trump, a YouTube video of the Israeli televangelist Benny Hinn performing faith healings. Trump laughed at the spectacle and muttered, "Man, that's some racket." The advisor said Trump expressed awe at Joel Osteen's media empire, particularly the viewership of the televised sermons. The viewership, look at this. Millions of people are watching these people. Maybe I could get in on that racket, Trump thinks. Yeah, maybe. Okay, Toby in Louisville, Kentucky. It says here you disagree with me, Toby. What's up?
Oh, yeah. Well, how can you say he's the worst president ever when the man got the USMCA passed? He got a crime bill passed that the half-black president never got passed. He's got conservative...
Okay, hey, Toby, let's just take these one at a time, okay? You throw them up and I'll knock them down. Number one, what did you say? That you're talking about the trade deal. Okay, well, that deal offers any company that wants to shut down a factory in the United States and move it to Mexico, their tax gets cut in half. That deal that Donald Trump negotiated, no, it's true. You can look it up. That deal that Donald Trump negotiated with Mexico, the USMCA, actually makes it easier for companies to offshore their factories to Mexico. And in fact, several companies have done it since he signed the deal. So, okay, number one. Number two, what was the second thing you said?
How about the crime bill?
The crime bill, the main thing that crime bill does, and this is why the Koch brothers were in favor of it, is it's got what's called a mens rea piece in it. Mens rea is Latin for state of mind. And basically what that crime bill accomplished was saying that unless you can prove, if a CEO of a company says, don't build that safety thing into that car, or, go ahead and dump that poison into the river, and somebody dies as a result of the decision that the CEO made, it used to be you could hold the CEO accountable for it. Now you have to prove that the CEO actually told somebody that they intended to kill people with that decision. The crime bill was entirely about protecting CEOs. Next.
It wasn't about letting black people have a second chance.
No, not so much. First of all, it only applied to federal crimes. There were a couple hundred people who qualified for early release from prison, federal crimes. Okay. And some were black and some were white. Most of the federal crimes, though, are not black people. Go ahead.
The point I'm trying to make, though, is the man, everybody says he's a clown. My God, his kids, he's riding around in a big 747 with his name on the side with properties all over the world. And I know a little bit about money. And if you owe $400 million to banks and other places, you got to have a dime or two and be worth something, because nobody will give you $400 million if you're a clown. So that first thing, you can't even go in the bank and borrow 10 grand if you got 10 grand.
Donald Trump has not been able to borrow money from an American bank since 1996. No American bank has been willing to lend him money. He's been borrowing this money from Deutsche Bank and from foreign oligarchs.
Well, I mean, they're not.
Doesn't it concern you, Toby, that the guy who's making decisions for this country may owe $400 million to some guy in Russia or to Saudi Arabia? Doesn't that concern you? Are you not concerned that decisions are being made right now? And he has no way of paying it back. I mean, we now know what his cash flow is like. And in 2 or 3 years, he's going to really have a crunch. If he's president, it'll be harder for people to foreclose.
He could just sell a couple golf courses and a couple hotels. He'd be flush with cash. I mean, he don't even take.
You can't right now. Nobody's buying those things right now, Toby. Their value is in the crapper. The COVID. This is why he's trying to open the country. He's already killed 200,000 Americans and got 7 million Americans who have now a pre-existing condition.
Let me tell you right now. I was at Walmart earlier in Louisville, and I'll tell you what I told Daddy. You can't blame Donald Trump. These people were in Walmart, backed out the door. You couldn't get in the gas station. Lowe's was packed. People won't stay out of the. People are crazy.
That's because they're believing the president. They're doing what Americans have done ever since George Washington. They're believing the president. And the problem, Toby, is that this president is lying to them.
Half of them's Democrats, I'm sure. The country's 50-50, basically, 42-42 or something like that. But now, God Almighty, everywhere I go, there's just people everywhere. Now, they might have on masks.
I'm telling you, Toby, those people you're seeing are the people who are watching Fox News. The people who are actually listening to the news or reading the newspaper. They're not showing up without masks. They're not crazy.
Well, you can't watch CNN, MSNBC. They're not political. They just dog everything. You know, one thing I think about, that I can't hardly vote for Joe Biden. He's been there for 8 years, him and Obama. I mean, why didn't they try to?
And he took the economy from the worst crash since the Great Depression and put it on a trajectory to do really well.
Why didn't Trump just sit on his butt and do nothing? I mean, they didn't do nothing the time they was there, just being president. Oh, Trump could have done that. He started all kinds of trouble, trade agreements, and I mean, the man is not.
Ruined our farmers, didn't it? Ruined our farmers. Toby, good talking to you. I hope you call again. Thank you for the call. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And by the way, in the second hour, one of the leading experts on fascism, Jason Stanley, in the world, is going to be on the show. And in our third hour, Greg Ballast is here. Amazing stuff on the voting purges.
For our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government, grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
On the science revolution this week, Trump never noticed a modern-day American disaster. He's trying to spread the virus as far and wide as possible. We should call this today what history will call it when it looks back on this moment: genocide. David Kraft with the Nuclear Energy Information Services here. It's time to end Exelon's nuclear hostage crisis. Climate risks are compounding financial challenges for Midwest nuclear plants. Plus, Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist II of Michigan drops by to explain that racism is a public health crisis. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 34 minutes past the hour. Ed in Palm Bay, Florida. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing? Got to take you off speaker.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking that tonight at the debate, Biden really needs to hit him head on. I mean, you know, the guy's an egotistical narcissist. So if you call him out on his lies and just basically laugh at him in his face, it will just become completely unhinged. I truly.
Yeah, I think ridicule is probably the most effective tool to use against him because he has no sense of humor. He doesn't know how to deal with it. He can't tell a self-depreciating
I mean, if you make him look small. You make him look small, and he just can't take it. I actually was in the 90s a union roofer in Manhattan, and I was one of the thousands of people that he stiffed us on 2 of our jobs. And yeah,
really tell me about it.
Good. Oh, the first one he they litigated it, and he wound up having to pay, but it was for pennies on the dollar. And then the second time he used like a shell. I don't remember I was in like mid-20s, but I think it was like a shell company that hired us, and same thing. I actually moved down to Florida and was in Okeechobee doing a job, and I wound up becoming, talking to this gas station owner who had a friend who was worked at his Doral golf course as his landscaper. And after his work was all said and done, Trump would actually move this tree here, move it there. I don't like this. I don't like that. And the guy invoiced him for all the final bill, and it was about maybe like 1.2 mil. And he basically wrote him a check for like $200,000. And the guy, I believe he was undocumented, so he was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Wow. Well, that is consistent with everything that we've heard about Donald Trump and how he does business over the years, that basically everything he does is a con. I mean, the guy's been sued over 3,000 times by people saying that he screwed them. And when you add the lawsuits around Trump University and things like that, the number's probably much greater than that. So, Ed, thanks for sharing your story with us. That's amazing. Yeah, good talking to you. Thank you. Douglas in Crystal City, Missouri. Hey, Douglas, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I got a question, and I'll take the answer off air. They keep talking about expanding the Supreme Court to nullify the picks. They've also got the ability to decrease it. Now, if they went down to 5, how does that work? Would the least senior justices be the ones that have to vacate, or can they make them vacate?
No, they did. This has happened twice before. In the election after John Adams lost the election of 1801, him and the Federalists reduced the size of the Supreme Court by 1 to deny Jefferson any nominees. Congress reversed that a year and a half later. But, it was relatively a non-issue. There was an open seat at the time. And then when Andrew Johnson became president, after Lincoln was assassinated, the size of the Supreme Court was 10, and they reduced it down to 7, as I recall. And, there were still members on the Supreme Court. So basically what they were saying was, because one guy had died or had retired, I'm pretty sure he had died just before Lincoln was assassinated. So there was an open seat on the Supreme Court. So basically what they were saying is, not only can you not fill this open seat, but two more people can die and you can't fill those seats either. So the court would have, slowly shrunk down to that 7 people size. Ultimately, had that stayed in place. Actually, what happened was Ulysses Grant was sworn in as president a couple of years later, at the end of Andrew Johnson's term, and as a result, Congress met and changed the size of the court to 9, which is where it's been ever since, which is where it is right now. So that's how it would work, Douglas. Make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, it does.
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Hello.
John in San Diego. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi. I've listened to you for a long time and read your books. I love it. I'm pushing for a big stall before the election on the nomination of Barrett to replace RBG. And there are a number of things that Schumer has in his context where he could, he has a weak stall, but also for every vote, he could require a quorum, which would require the Republicans not to be campaigning, but they're in all 51 if he keeps his people off the floor. There are stalls that he has, and of course the impeachment thing that Pelosi has would really stall them. If we get past the election and Kelly can win in Arizona, like it looks like, they'll only need one more Republican between the election and inauguration. I think someone can come over. I don't know that Romney will, but someone could come over. I think we ought to push for that. We need to preserve the court. Otherwise, for a generation, we're conservative. What do you think?
It's a very real possibility, John, but I think it's a very remote possibility that any of those things will work. The simple reality is that, we've been through this before. I mean, this country has been through this before. We had a Supreme Court back in the 1930s when FDR was trying to put the country back together after the Republican Great Depression that kept knocking down. I mean, they said you can't have laws against child labor. That's how wild it was, right? You can't have laws to protect labor unions. You can't have laws that protect workers. In fact, that was what the Lochner decision.
He got the court to be less conservative in the 40s.
That's correct. He threatened to pack the court, and they said, "Okay, we'll change our minds." And I'm disheartened by the fact that we've got a person who's probably to the right of Clarence Thomas about to go onto the court. But I don't think that it's the end of the republic. It might be the end of Obamacare, but that may be the birth of something really great. I mean, Susan Sarandon at a certain
from Biden. Do you think he could?
I think it's entirely possible, John. If the Supreme Court blows up Obamacare, I think it's entirely possible. And then if the Supreme Court says no, you can't have Medicare for all, because Amy Coney Bryant is more or less on the record saying that that's the logic that she's applying to say that Obamacare should not exist is essentially the same logic that you would apply to say Social Security and Medicare shouldn't exist. They weren't contemplated by the founders.
They don't want that either. Sure.
Right. They weren't part of the original idea. So
if we can get enough of a majority in the Senate or eliminate the filibuster, I think we can get some of those things with the real big.
Well, yeah, maybe we'll see. But the thing is. And the point that I want to make, John, is let's not get all, oh my God here, right? I mean, there's wild stuff going on. Donald Trump, in all probability, is leaning hard on Ron DeSantis in Florida because Ron DeSantis is the governor of the state where Donald Trump has his 2 largest and most money-losing properties in the United States, Doral and Mar-a-Lago. And they're losing a pile of money. They're losing millions of dollars a year. And he desperately wants Florida to open back up so that people will use his properties. And he's willing to kill people to get that. I mean, and that's like, oh my God, it's like we're despairing about this. And then the whole Supreme Court thing and Mitch McConnell and Trump is going to use Congress and the courts to try to steal the election. If all of that happens, if we get, Auntie Barrett on the court and Donald Trump is president, is sworn back in on January 20th, and I mean, just every worse outcome you can imagine, I am still of the opinion, now I'm very concerned about all those things, and I'm frankly very upset about all those things, but I'm of the opinion that the idea of democracy, the ideal of an egalitarian nation, the notion that we all look out for each other in this country, that this country was created in part to promote the general welfare, as it says in multiple places in the Constitution, including its preamble that lays out its goals and purposes. I'm of the opinion that Americans won't allow this to stand. Now, I think, we may be in for a very rough ride. I think if Trump can get himself sworn back in again, he's probably going to try and get us into a war to deflect our attention away from everything else that's going on. That'll suck up a lot of media time while he's, trying to figure out what can he give to Mohammed bin Salman so Salman will give him $1 billion so he can pay off his loans that are coming due. But I promise you, I can virtually guarantee that that's the sort of thing that Trump is going to be doing, because that's exactly what Jared Kushner did with Trump's help. He needed $1 billion. His 555 or 666 Fifth Avenue property was going down in flames. And what does he do? He goes off to the Middle East and stirs up some trouble and gets the money. Trump will do the same thing. But all of that said, I don't think that we can allow ourselves to slide into despair, and I don't think that we should be freaking out. And I do believe that, and this is the point I started to make earlier, Susan Sarandon back, 4 years ago said that she was voting green, and people were like, oh my God, what if Donald Trump becomes president? And she says, then people will realize how screwed up and corrupt this system is and how much it needs to change. And I was horrified by that when she said it. And a lot of us were very pissed off by that whole thing. And we were campaigning really, really hard to get Hillary Clinton elected as president. But there is some truth to what she said. And America is a hell of a lot more woke than we were 4 years ago. And people are paying attention, and people are voting, and people are learning about civics. And, I think we're going to get through this. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls in just a minute. And welcome back. Mark in Colombia in South America. Mark, I'm sorry, I didn't notice that you were calling from outside the country. I would have put you on earlier. What's up?
Oh, not a problem, Tom. Thanks. I wanted to talk about tonight's debate. I agree with Nancy Pelosi. I don't think Biden should have consented to debate this guy, because if you do, you're normalizing this guy. He doesn't deserve to be treated as a normal presidential candidate. And by debating him, you're just throwing him a lifeline now, okay? Because he can get on there and just start lying, which he will. And what's Chris Wallace going to do? Is he going to try and fact check him every single lie?
No, he's already said he's not going to.
Sorry?
Wallace has already said that he's not going to fact check anything. His job is to be invisible.
Right, exactly. So my belief on this whole thing is it's kind of a microcosm of the whole problem. The Democrats are fighting a symmetrical war, and the Republicans with Trump are fighting an asymmetrical war. And you just cannot treat this guy as a normal candidate. He doesn't deserve to be on a national debate stage. He really doesn't. With his serial line, I think Nancy Pelosi is right. Just tell him no. We're not going to debate you, because you're not a normal candidate. You don't behave in a normal way, and why should we normalize you? But obviously,
I get your argument, Mark, and I could argue it. I mean, I don't wholly disagree with it, but Joe Biden wants to be president of the United States. If somebody wants to be president of the United States, number one, they should be able to stand up to a con man for an hour and a half in front of a national audience. And so, I am very hopeful that Joe Biden will be at the top of his game tonight, number one. And number two, Donald Trump is, I mean, there's so many ways that Biden can deflate Trump. It was, 40 years ago, I think? This week, in fact, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan had only one presidential debate. And at the end of that debate, Reagan turned to the camera and said, and I'm paraphrasing this from a really old memory, but I think I got this, Mark. He turned to the camera and he said, "The question you have to ask yourself, Mr. and Mrs. Middle America voter, the question you have to ask yourself is, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? When you go to the store to buy things, do you have more purchasing power? Do you have a better job? Is your life easier? If the answer to that question is yes, then vote for Jimmy Carter. If the answer to that question is no, vote for me." And Biden needs to basically say that.
Well, that's true, but the thing is, I don't trust the media's coverage of the debate. They're going to normalize Trump too, and the bar is so low for him that if he doesn't just
but he is the president right now. I mean, if we could debate how aggressively the Clinton campaign should have fought against that and said, wait a minute, 17,000 votes in Pennsylvania, there's something weird going on here, I want to investigate, whatever. But he is president. And there's something, normal about somebody being president. You can't get around it, Mark.
Yeah, I know. I just hate to see him be accorded all the because I don't think of him as a president.
Yeah, I'm with you, but it's an argument that we all tried to make months ago, and Nancy Pelosi tried to make, and Biden wasn't having it. So we're just going to have to hope for the best. And Joe Biden's not he's not even remotely incompetent. He just doesn't speak well. So because of his speech impediment. Anyhow, we'll be back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So it turns out back in November, the spy agencies in the United States were notifying the Trump administration that something's going on in China. Looks like another SARS outbreak. Maybe we should get ready for this. It was ignored. I've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program that basically goes through the whole timeline, all the way from, actually going back to 2018 when Trump disbanded 3 different anti-pandemic agencies in the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Council, and the executive branch. Just closed them down, fired the people. That was the end of that. How he ignored the intelligence in November, he ignored the intelligence in December, he ignored the epidemic now coming into the United States in January, he ignored it in February, just going the blow-by-blow timeline. And I think it's really worth having it all in one place, a good recap, a good summary of this that you can refer to and you can share with your friends. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. And welcome back. Boy, what a day, huh? It's going to be a fascinating one tonight, too. David in San Francisco. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, all right, Tom. Just before the big Tulsa rally, when Trump was out there doing other rallies without masks and the epidemic was rapidly spreading, I was lucky enough to call a legal talk show down there in Tulsa, and I got the one of the city supervisors and asked them, as I understand it, the Tulsa rally was held in a public building. It's their public arena. I think they've privatized it. And I was able to ask, if there was a performance bond, that if Trump held that rally without face masks, would he waive the performance bond? And the supervisor agreed with the principle of it, and he wasn't sure if they had actually done it. Now, if the news has come out that Trump is really more bankrupt than it would seem, and if it comes out that Brad Parscale and the Death Star operation pretty well bankrupted the campaign, I'm just wondering whether each of the venues that he's attempting to hold rallies in, if they demand a performance bond up front before they even allow him in the building. I don't know if you've...
My understanding, David, and and this is based on what happened in El Paso, and there was 4 or 5 other cities that were listed in the news story that I was sharing with people, and this was almost a year ago. But what this story said was that, and this wasn't about performance bonds and venues, but it's related. It was about the cost of security. Cities, when a big event comes to town, and the city has to hire extra police or pay a whole bunch of overtime, they charge for that. And the Trump campaign, or Donald Trump, or somebody owes El Paso hundreds of thousands of dollars, and a whole bunch of other cities hundreds of thousands of dollars, money that's supposed to go to the police departments. And Trump has not paid any of that. According to this article, now again, this was a year ago or in the last year that this article came out, that the Trump hasn't paid any of them ever. And you've got cities all over America that are just like, whoa. And, whether that's still going on or not, I'm not sure. And I'm guessing those are the kind of stories that are going to come out after the dust settles. But with regard to the performance...
it just crosses my mind that if he is far more bankrupt and
I don't think he's putting up bonds.
I agree, but there's a video just before the doors opened in Tulsa. There's a video showing the Trump campaign staff removing the social distancing stickers. Part of the requirements of Tulsa were that they had the social distance. Well, they were pulling those stickers off the seats before the doors opened, and in fact, there were
which had been put on by the city. But the flip side of that, David, is that the Trump campaign also had everybody who showed up sign a waiver of liability.
Exactly.
And I'm guessing that they would argue that eliminates liability both to Trump and to the city or county. I haven't read the limitation of liability, but I'm guessing it's absolute.
Right. No, it isn't. It clearly isn't absolute. And in fact, because they were pulling the social distancing stickers in violation of the terms of the contract, that would invalidate any waivers like that.
If that's in the contract.
Beg pardon?
If that's in the contract. My guess is the contract's an old boilerplate contract that predates COVID.
No, this was because COVID was starting to spike. And in fact, I've got local newspaper articles from around Tulsa a week and a half after it showing an 800% spike in COVID after the rally. 800%. So, this thing he has caused endless death and harm by holding these rallies without social distancing and face masks.
He's continuing to do it because he wants to get people into his hotels, in my opinion.
Well, I'm just wondering, the performance bonds, the refusal for him to live up to various safety standards, they could, if he's bankrupt already, the demand to put up cash up front or not have the rally really comes to mind. You're old enough to remember the Who did a famous concert up in Ohio, and they only opened a certain amount of doors in the auditorium, and a couple of people died in a stampede. And so the Who were basically denied venues in America, because of that stampede. And a lot of rock concerts, this is just kind of standard for rock concerts back in the 70s and whatnot. So there can't be, a guy who can just because he says he's the president, that he can go out there and get people killed and, pretend as if...
But he's doing it, David.
Well, that gets into whether each local venue, all politics is local. And if he gets the local, that becomes a local murder or a local reckless endangerment.
There's going to be a reckoning. There's no doubt in my mind. David, thank you for the call. With regard to the performance bond, I just don't know. I mean, this is sort of like a rent deposit in case you damage the house, or the apartment. Anyhow, we'll be back. We're gonna check in on fascism right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
America's #1 auto protection company. More information at carshield.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowl, B-O-L-L, and branch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And TEEF, T-E-E-F, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teefhealth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested. Special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status. Fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive sum, but identity conflict is zero sum. The book Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Professor Jason Stanley. He's the Jacob Urowski Professor of Philosophy at Yale University, the author of 4 books, most recently, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. His Twitter handle, Jason, INTRATOR. And just a FYI, Andy Z and Jason Stanley will be having a conversation, How Fascism Works and How to Stop It, as part of the Brooklyn Book Festival, sponsored by Revolution Books. If you go to revolutionbooksnyc.org, right up at the top of the page, there's a link to that. It's going to be tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Jason Stanley, welcome to the program. And I believe you've been with us before, have you not?
I've been with you several times before.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. It's been a long year. We have talked. In fact, thank you. I recall we have talked in the past about your 10 items in How Fascism Works of where fascism comes. The mythic past and all these pieces to it. Where are we at right now in this spectrum or in this process, or would you use a different metaphor even to describe it?
Well, many people, when I published this book 2 years ago on fascist politics, said that it was alarmist. And when you look at the reasons they gave for why they said it was alarmist, I'm afraid we're seeing those reasons fall by the wayside. For example, they said Trump doesn't attack the democratic processes. The Trump administration is not seeking, as we see in other countries like Hungary and Poland, to seize the courts, to rig the election. Well, I think we're seeing a very strong effort to do just that. We're seeing the Republican Party, become a cult of the leader, become a very explicit cult of the leader. So we're seeing it transform before our eyes. We're seeing Republicans less and less willing to even give lip service to defending democracy. So the idea behind fascist ideology is that it's a cult of the leader. The leader promises national restoration in the face of humiliation and challenges and socialist and leftist challenges, and brought on by liberals, Marxists, and minorities. And we're seeing that kind of politics, and we're seeing it transform into policy and possibly even result in a stolen election.
I'm curious your take on kind of the cycles of history, how this typically plays out. I mean, we saw the rise of fascism in Europe in the 30s. It was defeated through a brutal and bloody war, but it was defeated. We've seen, you saw, the rise of Pinochet, Reagan's great experiment back in there. Was it Nixon's great experiment back in the day? And it was defeated. Is there a certain, inevitable is probably too strong a word, but is it highly likely that if Trump actually succeeds in, having the states or the, Congress or the courts or whatever declare him president regardless of the outcome of the election, and does get sworn in, and we do become a fascist or quasi-fascist state, and I think you could argue effectively that we're already more than halfway there, that it's going to get a whole lot worse over time, or that then becomes the beginning of the revolution. I mean, Hungary had only been a democracy for, 10 years when Orban took it over? We've been a democracy, arguably, for 240 years. How do you see this playing out in a worst-case scenario?
Well, we've only been a democracy since Jim Crow ended. We've had large portions of our voting population disenfranchised. We have we think always of interwar Europe. I don't think that's the right frame. I think we should think of the aspects of U.S. history that so influenced the interwar European fascist movements, particularly in Germany. We're going back to the voter suppression of minorities. I mean, in some sense we never left, but massive voter suppression. The handing power to a party that has minority support, and rigging the system so that it retains control no matter what happens. So I think the right model is we should look back at our own history for the antecedents to this. After all, Paxton calls the Ku Klux Klan arguably the first fascist organization. The 1920s Ku Klux Klan, whose ideology we are seeing yet again, is a fascist ideological organization. The kind of white Christian fascism in U.S. history is the ideology that I think we're returning to. And then as far as the administrative system, well, we have plenty of models all around the world. Hungary, you mentioned. There's Latin American countries. Pinochet is a good idea. This kind of, when capitalism immiserates life for so many people, then you have to have a culture war dog and pony show for the immiserated masses to entertain them, and a powerful police force to suppress dissent and attempts at overturning the status quo. And so this kind of system where you have sort of powerful business elites harnessed to a sort of white Christian evangelical extremist movement seeking to prevent people from rebelling against the system, seeking economic and racial justice. This is the kind of structure that I think is emerging, and autocratic rule is the norm in the world. What's unusual, rare, really almost unique is democracy. So, having an autocrat rule on behalf of financial elites to keep down the labor movements, to keep and throwing religious showing culture war benefits and using race to divide those immiserated by their policies. This is how you would expect a kind of American autocracy to emerge.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Professor Jason Stanley, his book, How Fascism Works. Professor, we have about a minute and a half before we're going to hit a hard break here. You just, to a large extent, I think, just described the government of China. And is that the new model for the world?
Well, I think China is a different model than what we're seeing here. China is actually an efficient authoritarianism. What we're seeing is not an efficient authoritarianism. We're seeing a sort of clownish authoritarianism with a powerful police force, seeking to, China, it does, has for all its brutality and anti-democratic, anti-human rights, concentration camps, which I decry in the most powerful possible terms, at least tries to do something for many of its impoverished citizens. What we have here is a kind of, grotesque, more Latin American kind of autocracy with a lot of periodic protests, flares that will be controlled by military and police. That's more the model.
So what do we do about
I would expect.
So what do we do about it?
Well, I think we have to appeal to people's democratic instincts among conservatives. We have to bring in conservatives, liberals, leftists, progressives in the first instance, and say we have to return to a rule of law state. This corruption, endemic corruption and thievery has to stop on all sides. And then we have to be prepared to protest nonviolently on the street in case of a stolen election.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Professor Jason Stanley, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them is the book. And check out his event tomorrow at revolutionbooksnyc.org. Professor Stanley, thanks for dropping by.
Thank you so much.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
My pleasure. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Bob in Burien, Washington. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Quick question for you, Tom, if I could. In the last hour, you were talking about originalism in terms of the court. And Scalia was on the court in 2010 when Citizens United was decided. Could you make an originalist argument for Citizens United?
Well, there were two large pieces to Citizens United. The first was that money is the same thing as speech, and the second was that corporations are the same as persons. And the argument is made in the decision by Scalia and his colleagues, and is called out specifically and rebutted by John Paul Stevens in his rebuttal, or in his dissent, excuse me. And that is the argument that they made is kind of twisted around. They said, you and I, under the First Amendment, Bob, you and I, as citizens of the United States, have not only the right to free speech, that is to speak, but an important part of the right of free speech is to hear as well. And if we inhibit the most well-informed economic voices in our society, and that's a phrase that's in the decision, the most well-informed economic voices, which is corporations. If we inhibit them from being able to speak to us by saying you can't run a political ad in favor of a particular candidate or a particular issue, then we are denying ourselves the ability to hear speech, and that's every bit as much an infringement on free speech as stopping somebody from speaking in the first place. So by saying to billionaires, no, you can't, buy these ads and support these politicians with your money, or saying to a corporation, you can't do that we're actually violating the core principle of the First Amendment free speech clause. That's their argument.
Could you
now,
make an
I
argument
would say in response to that, and this is what John Paul Stevens says in his dissent in Citizens United, and that dissent, by the way, only runs a few pages, and it's fascinating reading, and every American should read it. It should be part of civics courses. It's a very digestible dissent. And in his dissent, he basically says this is a complete nonsense argument. It's twisting reality to meet this case. And, is that to say that if some poor person doesn't have the ability to publish a newspaper article or run an advertisement that we should subsidize that? I mean, where did this mythical right to be heard come from? Yes, we want an informed populace, but it's one of the reasons why we have the media and why we specifically protect the media in the First Amendment. But to say that we have to similarly protect billionaires and corporations and their ability to speak to us and inform us about the important issues of the day, the 4 liberals on the court just said that's nonsense. The 5 conservatives on the court said, no, this is the essence of the entire argument.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, Bob, thanks a lot for the call. I hope that was helpful. I don't have. It's really hard to defend some of these arguments, but I'm telling you, the dissent in Citizens United is brilliant. There's actually a couple of them. And in fact, I believe Ginsburg may have authored one of the secondary dissents. It's been 10 years since I read it, but it's pretty awesome. We'll be right back. Stick around. On the science revolution this week, Trump never noticed a modern-day American disaster. He's trying to spread the virus as far and wide as possible. We should call this today what history will call it when it looks back on this moment, genocide. David Kraft with the Nuclear Energy Information Service is here. It's time to end Exelon's nuclear hostage crisis. Climate risks are compounding financial challenges for Midwest nuclear plants. Plus, Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist II of Michigan drops by to explain that racism is a public health crisis. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. One of our callers was just asking how did the Supreme Court justify in Citizens United the whole idea that corporations should be able to participate in politics, and I pointed out that the court basically took the First Amendment and turned it inside out and said that the right to speak is also a right to be heard, and that we average people have a right to be heard, have a right to hear, and we need, if billionaires and giant corporations are stopped by the law from inserting themselves into politics, from running political ads, then we don't get to hear those ads, and our free speech rights are inhibited because we didn't hear the ads. That's the logic of Citizens United. That's how bizarre it is. But hey, 5 out of 9 justices on the Supreme Court not only bought that logic, but invested an enormous amount of time and effort into selling that logic to the rest of us. Now we've got a new kind of logic on the horizon, and this is something that has gotten very little attention about Amy Coney Barrett. And I think really we should be paying attention to this. There's this thing called 14th Amendment denialism. You've heard about climate deniers, you've heard about democracy deniers, you've heard about, COVID deniers, mask denier. Well, now there's 14th Amendment denial. Now, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed in the years immediately after the Civil War to end slavery in the United States. The 13th Amendment explicitly says the only way that slavery can survive going forward in the United States is if somebody has committed a crime and is imprisoned under law. If you are imprisoned under law, you can still be considered a slave, but otherwise slavery has ended in the United States. That's the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment has a couple of provisions in it. The two main ones are, number one, if you are born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States. And number two, and actually this is number one, the big part of it, is that every citizen of the United States is entitled to equal protection under the law. It's called the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And that has been used to basically enforce our civil rights laws. The 14th Amendment is the cornerstone on which the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and multiple civil rights laws have been passed, is on that part of the 14th Amendment. And then the 15th Amendment, which was passed a year or so after the 14th Amendment, says that people can vote, regardless of their previous position of servitude. So, end of history lesson, right? Okay, there's your history lesson. Now comes Amy Coney Barrett saying, and these are actual quotes, these are two quotes that she has written about the 14th Amendment. Quote, Congress has to decide whether to rely on the power conferred by the possibly illegitimate 14th Amendment. Possibly illegitimate? And then she wrote, the originalist legislator may have to face questions such as the legitimacy of the 14th Amendment. Now, this legitimacy argument is one that has been made by apologists for Jim Crow literally since the 1870s. And it goes something like this. When the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed and put into the Constitution, the Confederate States had no say in them because they were not allowed back into the Union until after they had amended their own state constitutions to strip out slavery. That literally, that was the core of Reconstruction. We're going to reconstruct these states. We're going to rebuild these states, the legal structure of these states, so that they're no longer slave states. And so the argument, the 14th Amendment denier argument, is that because a bunch of states, the former Confederate states, did not have a say in arguing or passing or ratifying the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, therefore they are illegitimate. Therefore, we shouldn't have to pay any attention to them. Therefore, slavery is not outlawed in the United States, 13th Amendment. Therefore, you don't have the right of equal protection under the law, regardless of what minority group you may belong to, the 14th Amendment. Therefore, you don't have birthright citizenship if your parents were illegal immigrants, to use the phrase of the right, from Mexico, for example, and you were born here. And therefore, if you're black in the United States, or Hispanic in the United States, or Native American in the United States, you don't have a specific right to vote. The 15th Amendment. That deals specifically with black people, but ancestors of slaves. But broadly speaking, this is what it is. And I mean, this is totally mind-boggling, right? Georgia's state legislature passed a resolution. This is the title of the resolution, quote, a memorial to Congress of the United States of America urging them to enact such legislation as they may deem fit to declare the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution of the United States were never validly adopted and that they are null and void of no effect, end quote. Now that passed the Georgia legislature. It was 1957, but it passed the Georgia legislature. This is a white supremacist mythology, period, full stop. There is no other way to describe this than that. And on at least two occasions that we know about, Amy Coney Barrett has questioned the legitimacy of the 14th Amendment. In this context,
you're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Let us hope somebody asks about that at her confirmation hearings, assuming that we get to that point. We'll be back with you, Paul.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone and of his own accord would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Our video for our supporters of our program this week that's available over at thomhartmann.com talks about the radical idea of universal health care. What countries in the world might actually have universal health care, something that, according to Republicans, we're just not smart enough or competent enough or whatever. It's too radical an idea, you know. They include Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Chile, Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Iceland, Israel, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Poland, Portugal, South Korea, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. So why can't we do it here? Well, because you've got an entire political party, the Republican Party, and a few Democrats who are wholly owned subsidiaries of the health insurance industry. And you got a health insurance industry that's paying its CEOs millions, in one case, United Healthcare, billions, or billion. And so, gridlock. Anyhow, it's over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, what a day, huh? Robert in McCormick, South Carolina. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
I got a comment that I wanted to say because of the fact I think everybody in America should be offended at our president for saying some of the things he has said. I mean, I'm saying everybody. I got drafted and went in the Army in 1968. I feel as though I was doing my duty. I found out the president lied and called the rest of us that went dumb and stupid. Okay, if he got out and called himself smart, now he's evading all his taxes with everybody in America is paying taxes. He said he didn't pay no taxes because he's smart. So if he's smart, that means all the rest of us are dumb and stupid. So how you going to have a president that consider everybody dumb and stupid, and he's taking advantage of all of us, getting over on everybody, and he is the president? Now, how is that?
Well, I think the larger point here, Robert, is that it sets a terrible example. But it's one that's consistent with Republicans. I mean, this goes back to Ronald Reagan saying that government is the problem, not the solution. It goes back to the starve the beast strategy. That we've got to cut taxes and therefore cut funding to programs. You don't want government helping average people. There's actually a whole philosophical construct here that Trump is running off, and this is why I think that, and Robert, thank you for the call on that. Your points are perfect. This is why I think that it's a mistake that Joe Biden is running ads that are showing how much income tax are being paid by teachers and construction managers. Instead, they should be, as response to the revelations in the New York Times about Trump's tax returns, and the fact that he only paid $750 in taxes. I think that the question that should be asked is, or the point that should be made is not average working people pay more in taxes than Trump. Yeah, everybody understands that. The billionaires have gamed the system forever. That's not, a scandal or an outrage any longer. It's something that needs to be fixed. And I think it is scandalous and outrageous, but, the average American, particularly the average Republican voter, will just say, yeah, he is a smart guy. He's a billionaire. Instead, the question that should be asked is, who does Donald Trump owe $400 million to? Where's he going to get the money when it comes to time to pay it off? And what has he done as president to help satisfy his creditors? Because we know it's not an American bank, because there's no American bank that'll loan him money. Hasn't been for 20 years. And I really think that that's the thing that, we need to be paying big time attention to. Paul in Lucerne, California. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'd like to talk about the debate tonight. Everybody's all saying Joe shouldn't do the debate. Well, they're wrong. He has no choice. He's the president. He has to debate him. And everybody's worried about Joe's performance. I wouldn't be. If you remember back to the Paul Ryan debate, Joe cleaned his clock as soon as Paul Ryan did what? Lied to him. When you get Joe mad and off-prepared remarks, Joe is marshaling the facts at his command, and he's mad. So his stuttering problem is put in the back burner. Anger is now taking over, and now he's just destroying you with facts that he's marshaling from his brain. He's not using his prepared remarks. He's just shooting from the hip when he's at his best.
Well, it could be. I hope that that's the case, Paul. We're all sort of hoping and guessing and trying to figure out all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we'll see tonight. But I hope you're right. Mark in Sauk City, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey there. It's interesting the new justice nominee ignores the fact that, as Hamilton points out in 81 in the Federalist Papers, there's not a syllable that actually allows the Supreme Court to decide the constitutionality of laws. That was a power seized upon by the court itself, to do that.
Right, in 1803.
Like in Madison versus Marbury. Additionally, in 44, Madison points out that they didn't attempt to, as far as, that the laws passed to promote the general welfare, they didn't attempt to enumerate all the possible contingencies, that they might be called upon to, have laws to actually, for the people. I mean, that they didn't know then what, what we know now and what might arise. And as far as, the deniers of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, let's face it, the states that were in rebellion against the Union were given a pretty good deal. That in the past, in historical past, rebellions were met with decimations of those that rebelled against the state itself. I mean, that there wasn't mass executions of rebel leaders. In fact,
the closest we got to that, Mark, the closest we got to that was when the federal government seized Robert E. Lee's plantation at Arlington and turned it into a cemetery for war dead. That's Arlington Cemetery right now. That's Robert E. Lee's old plantation. And I'm thinking that, once Trump is out of office, we should seize the Trump properties in the United States. I think that there's three, actually there's a couple in New York City as well as apartment buildings, but the ones that have some land on them, Mar-a-Lago and Doral and maybe his Vegas property, and turn them into cemeteries for people who died of COVID.
Excellent idea. I mean, it just is sad that we've got people that have been brought up on this idea that, the nobility of the Southern cause, I think, is what it is. I mean, you see a lot of the old Westerns, that they're fighting for liberty, and they're fighting for white liberty. They weren't fighting for the liberty of the people they were held in chattel slavery. I mean, and it's interesting that
or the people whose land they were stealing.
And that Trump wants to get rid of education about slavery in schools. I mean, that it's just, what next to from him to, ignore the history of World War II and, the atrocities that the Nazis committed. That it's just shocking.
Mark, it's the old saying, my recollection is it was Marcus Aurelius who said it, but I'm probably wrong, that he who controls history controls the future.
Yeah, and that's what they want to do. They want to rewrite history. Well, there's 6 million people that died, in the Nazi, camps that most of them Jews, but a great many of them were liberals and people that social dissenters, and that the Nazis wanted to wipe out, and
that's who they went after first. First they went after the trade unionists. They went after those pesky unions that were raising objections to essentially to fascism. Yeah, Mark, I'm with you, and it's distressing, and we need to fight like hell to hang on to this republic, because it is hanging by a thread right now. Mark, thank you. Joseph in Salt Lake City, Utah. Hey, Joseph, what's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. Thank you very much for taking my call. I've been in politics all my life since I was little. Maybe because my grandfather was the president of my country. And then my great-grandfather was the president, and my cousin was the president. We've been on the Republican Party all our lives. And I just want to tell you something. Donald Trump is not Republican. The values that I grew up with of honesty and not tell lies and respect the poor and respect women and all this stuff, I don't see them. I don't know how Trump followers will follow that.
My dad was a Republican until the day he died in 2006, and I completely agree with you, Joseph. He would not recognize the Republican Party today.
Oh no! Honesty and honor in my country. Honor is a great thing. If you say if your word is a signed contract, and then I cannot see the Republican Party nowadays. And then when people come and say, "Oh, the Republicans," and I go like, "Hey, wait a minute, that's a cult. It's called the Trump cult." Oh, yeah. But my point is, everybody knows that. But my point is that we are in Utah. There is 3 lawsuits against Donald Trump in Utah, and nobody mentions that.
Are these from the state, or are they by individual parties?
They are by the Navajo Nation, by the Hopi Nation, and by the outdoor retailers called Patagonia.
Fascinating. Joseph, I'm going to have to look into this. I'm sorry we're out of time, but if you could tweet me any information on that, I'd love to see it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Dave in Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. Hey, Dave, what's up?
I was reading an article till I got kind of kicked out in New York Times by a guy named Adams Gentleson with a J, who was a parliamentarian on the staff of Harry Reid when he was in the Senate.
Okay.
And he wrote a nice editorial on the 21st in the Times about trying to slow up this procedure to keep Barrett off the ballot, or off the and it's a procedural deal. It has to do with unanimous consent. And apparently, if one senator objects to a unanimous consent thing, which of course they use for saving time in the Senate, now you've got to go back and do a quorum and make sure all the people are there in place.
Right, you have to have 51 senators there.
That's right. And of course,
and if the Democrats don't show up, that means all the Republicans have to be there, which means that they can't be out campaigning, which is what a lot of them are doing right now.
That's exactly right. That's the point I was going to make. Dick Durbin isn't buying it, but it sounds kind of promising to me. I don't know. Did you read it?
I did, yeah. And in fact, we talked about it on this program. I'm distressed by the unwillingness of some Democrats to play serious hardball here. I think that this is something, similar to war. It's the stakes are literally life and death for people, and 200,000 have already died.
I was disappointed in Durban when he was talking to Stephanopoulos. I thought he was, he gave up. I didn't like that.
Yeah. And I know that Speaker Pelosi was kind of defensive about this, saying we're going to use all the quivers all the arrows in our quiver.
I heard. I heard that.
Yeah,
I thought that might have been one of the quivers.
Yeah,
one of the arrows. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we will see. Dave, thank you. Thanks for the call and for pointing that out. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Hey, Professor, I know you play some chess. We're going to play a little political chess right now. We got to stop this nomination. This is how we do it. We're going to bring articles of impeachment, which the House can do, against Donald Trump right now. That stops the Senate cold turkey. Now,
it doesn't stop the Senate, Morris.
But they can't. No, yes, it does, Professor. Unless they change the rules, they can't do no other business when there's an impeachment hearing going on. Am I correct?
But it only takes them 51 votes to change the rules, and they've got 53 Republican senators.
Okay, now we're not trying to really impeach the guy. All we want to do is put those Republican senators on blast. The Republicans that
my point, and they know that, and they know that this is just an attempt to slow things down. So they'll just get together and change the rules.
Okay, well, then let them go ahead and do that, Professor. But anyway, we got to do something, and I think if we bring impeachment and articles of impeachment against Trump right now, that'd be the best thing that we can do, because we're sitting back watching a guy just decimate all of our institutions, our images.
I'm with you. I think Trump should be impeached because we want to remove him from office, not because we want to slow down the nomination process for Auntie Barrett. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. Morris, thank you for the call. Coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. The hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment tells how the Second Amendment was written to protect Georgia's slave patrols. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson. And the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Anna in Middletown, New York. Hey, Anna, what's up?
Hi, I just wanted to know why it is that people have not realized that we are still living in the past. There are people still fighting the Civil War down south. I grew up down there.
Yep.
And that's why nothing ever changes.
I think that's one piece of this 14th Amendment denialism that Amy Coney Barrett has apparently engaged in on at least a couple of occasions, where she's saying the possibly illegitimate 14th Amendment.
But why can't people see that we need to move forward, not backward, and they're trying to move us backward?
Because of racism. I mean, this is what it boils down to, Anna. There's a bunch of white people in this country, probably not the majority of white people, but certainly a sizable minority of white people, who want to live in all-white communities, who want to live in an all-white society, who don't want to have to interact with people of color, and who consider themselves superior to anybody whose skin is a little bit darker than theirs, regardless of what part of the world they came from. And it's a belief and an ideology, and it has, for most of the history of this country, been an actual political system and law. Now, I mean, there was this whole phony science around this stuff. I mean, it's nuts. But assuming that your question was not rhetorical, the answer is real simple: racism.
Well, don't you think we would be better off if we got some of these old relics out of office, vote them out?
I do. I very much do, Anna, and I'm really hopeful.
Have been in there. I grew up down south, and I can tell you that they treated black people. I witnessed it firsthand. They treated black people terrible.
Yeah, and continue to. Absolutely continue to. And now you've got, armed white guys wearing swastikas and Confederate flags showing up with guns in public spaces like we had here in Portland last weekend. And it's like the media is just like, well, look at that. It's the so-and-so group. It's like, I'm like, really? Do you understand what's going on here?
Well, it reminds you of how Hitler was with him. He wanted the Aryan race,
Yes, he did, and a lot of these people are. Yeah, and a lot of these people are quoting Hitler. They absolutely are. Anna, thank you for the call. Kirk in Lakeland, Florida. Hey, Kirk, what's up?
How are you, Tom? My point is very straightforward, and that is that if Trump, in light of the tax returns and him not paying much in tax returns over the course of the last decade or so, he's also needed more police protection. So, in essence, if he's not paying taxes, hasn't he essentially defunded the police? Isn't he essentially defunding the military? His trips that cost millions of dollars to go to Mar-a-Lago, not funded by any of his tax dollars. So it was really just a point of showing the hypocrisy. So there's a lot of Trump supporters who are saying, yeah, it's legal. Yeah, that's fine. But if you're a law and order candidate, you better pay your taxes. So that was my point.
Right.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, point made, Kirk, and a good one. Thank you. And by the way, let me add to that, the millions of dollars that the Trump campaign has yet to pay to cities all over America for police protection when Donald Trump comes to town for his campaign rallies. Leslie in Central Square, New York. Hey, Leslie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How you doing?
Good.
Tom?
What's on your mind?
You there?
I am. There's a delay has accumulated, Leslie, so just go for it.
Okay. Tom, I plan on energizing progressives in New York State to force Cuomo to take care of the police department problem and to stop the news from lying to the American people with two things before his next election, 2.5 years away. He does this stuff before the next election, or everybody we can get out there pushes to vote against him. That's the way to run an election.
I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Leslie, and that's what we need to be doing. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, the last minute's yours. What's up?
Yeah, Tom, I called you at 16. I warned you about this guy, Trump. And he's done everything we talked about.
Yeah. I remember you calling saying, I'm a New Yorker. I know this guy.
Yeah. Well, like I told your screener, I worked for a union company, but I got laid off every year till I got some seniority. And I'd have to take a job driving truck. It was for a gun store. And I had to go down to Manhattan to go out of the gun clubs. And I hear people talk about this guy. You mention his name, and people come off the chair because he's a cheat. He wouldn't pay his bills to the contractors. He had enough money to say, "Go ahead, sue me."
Right.
And
he's a grifter.
Yeah.
So here we are. It's 2020. We've got a pandemic going on. We've got a couple of countries that are on the verge of war with us, with open conflict with China, Russia, and Iran, where we've had their fighter jets and things pushing ours around, or their ships at sea, and we've got a con man and a grifter in the White House. What could possibly go wrong?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CarShield, America's #1 auto protection company. More information at carshield.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowl, B-O-L-L, and branch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And TEEF, T-E-E-F, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teefhealth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from Dorfman and Mallart's book, How to Read Donald Duck, Imperialist Ideology in the Disney Comic. And this is from the preface to the English edition. This book was first published in Spanish. To say that this book was burnt in Chile should not come as a surprise to anyone. Hundreds of books were destroyed and thousands more prohibited and censored. It was written in the middle of 1971, in the middle of the Chilean revolutionary process. Copper had been rescued, the land was being returned to the peasantry, the whole Chilean people were recovering the industries that during the 20th century had been the means of enrichment for Mr. Rockefeller, Grace, Guggenheim, and Morgan. Because this process was intolerable to the United States government and its multinational corporations, it had to be stopped. They organized a plan which at the time was suspected and since has been confirmed by Mr. Kissinger, Ford, and Colby to have been directed and financed by the United States intelligence services. Their objective was to overthrow the constitutional government of Chile. To realize their objective, an invisible blockade was imposed. Credits were denied, spare parts purchased for industrial machinery were not sent, and later the Chilean state bank accounts in the U.S. were blocked, and an embargo preventing the sale of Chilean copper throughout the world was organized. There were, however, two items which were not blocked: planes, tanks, ships, and technical assistance for the Chilean armed forces, and magazines, TV serials, advertising, and public opinion polls for the Chilean mass media, which continued for the most part to be in the hands of a small group which was losing its privileges. To maintain them with those of the U.S., their media prepared the climate for the bourgeois insurrection, which finally materialized some years later on the 11th of September, 1973. Each day, with expert U.S. advice, in each newspaper, each weekly, each monthly magazine, each news dispatch, each movie, and each comic book, their arsenal of psychological warfare was fortified. In the words of General Pinochet, the point was, quote, to conquer the minds, end quote, while in the words of Donald Duck in the magazine Dislandia, published in December 1971, coinciding with the first mass rallies of native fascism, the so-called March of the Empty Pots and Pans, the point was to, quote, restore the king. But the people did not want the restoration of the king, nor of the businessman. The popular Chilean cultural offensive, which accompanied the social and economic liberation, took multiple forms: wall paintings, popular papers, TV programs, motion pictures, theater, songs, literature. In all areas of human activity, with differing degrees of intensity, the people expressed their will. Perhaps the most important arm of this offensive was the work of the state publishing house, Quimantu, a word meaning sunshine of knowledge in the language of the Chilean Machupe Indians. In 2.5 years, it published 5 million books, twice the amount that had been published in all of Chile during the previous 70 years. In addition, it transformed the content of some of the magazines it had inherited from before the popular unity government and created new ones. It is in this multifaceted context, with the people on the march to cultural liberation, a process which also meant criticizing the mass cultural merchandise exported so profitably by the U.S. into the Third World, that How to Read Donald Duck was generated. We simply answered a practical need. It was not an academic exercise. For the Mad Dog Warriors on that September 11th, there were no paintings on the walls. There were only enormous stains which dirtied the city in memory. They, using the fascist youth brigades, whitewashed all the signing, many-colored walls of the nation. They broke records, murdered singers, destroyed radios and printing presses, imprisoned and executed journalists, so that nothing would be left to remind anybody of anything about the struggle for national liberation. But it was not enough to clean these cultural stains from the street. The most important task was to eliminate all those who bore the stain inside themselves: the fighters, workers, peasants, employees, students, and patriotic soldiers, to eliminate these creators of a new life, to eliminate this new life which grew, and for all that we created. This book, conceived for the Chilean people and our urgent needs, produced in the midst of our struggle, is now being published far from Chile in the uncle land of Disney, behind the barbed wire network of ITT. Mr. Disney, we are returning your duck, feathers plucked and well roasted. Look inside, you can see the handwriting on the wall, our hands still writing on the wall, Donald, to go home. This is written in 1975. And then this from David Kunzel's introduction. The names of the presidents change. That of Disney remains. 46 years after the birth of Mickey Mouse, 8 years after the death of his master, Disney's may be the most widely known North American name in the world. He is arguably the century's most important figure in bourgeois popular culture. He has done more than any single person to disseminate around the world certain myths upon which that culture has thrived, notably that of an innocence supposedly universal, beyond place, beyond time, and beyond criticism. The myth of U.S. political innocence is at last being dismantled, and the reality which it masks lies in significant areas exposed to public view. But the great American dream of cultural innocence still holds a global imagination in thrall. The first major breach into the Disney of this dream was made by Richard Schickel's The Disney Version, The Lifetimes and Commerce of Walt Disney, the book How to Read Donald Duck.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. You know, we have talked with Greg Palast many times about, in fact, over the years, about how the state of Georgia and the fellow Brian Kemp, who was the Secretary of State, was actively purging African Americans off the voting rolls in Georgia. Obviously, this is not something that is limited to Georgia, and Greg Palast has just broke some really wild news about what's going on in Wisconsin. On the line with us is our old friend Greg Palast. Greg Palast, PALAST.com is his website. His Twitter handle, just like mine, is Thom_Hartmann. His is Greg_Palast, PALAST. And Greg, welcome back. Tell us about Wisconsin.
Well, today the state Supreme Court of Wisconsin may be picking our president. They're hearing a lawsuit by a Republican-backed group to enforce a law signed by Scott Walker, which would require the removal of 129,000 voters from the voter rolls of Wisconsin. By the way, that's 6 times Trump's victory margin, 129,000 voters, on the grounds that they've moved. You know, you can't vote in Milwaukee if you've left Milwaukee. Well, problem. Sequana Taylor is on that list for having moved from Milwaukee. She's Milwaukee County Supervisor. So we went through the list. Black Voters Matter Fund yesterday released my report of the Palast Investigative Fund. It's at, by the way, you can get it at Capital Times, Madison, or at gregpalast.com. And what we found was ugly. 39,722 people on the list never moved. They're right where they registered. They shouldn't lose their votes. However, if you look at the map that we created, census tract by census tract, there is a near perfect match between people wrongly tagged to lose their vote and the black population of a census district. We actually called 700 of these so-called movers, and they all said we didn't move or we moved down the street, which means you don't lose your registration if you move in your neighborhood. That's another 58,000 people wrongly tagged, and almost everyone was a voter of color or a student. And I have to say, here's something here's some good news. The state of Wisconsin agrees with our findings and says this list is junk. We don't want to use it. So that's why they are in court today. The Wisconsin Supreme Court still has a Republican majority of 1. And if they choose to remove these 129,000 student and black voters, well, we could have a repeat of 2016 in which this kind of Jim Crow operation, not the voters, chooses Wisconsin and chooses the president. So I'm very concerned. So again, it's completely racial. It's completely wrong. And just to know how we know whether people moved or not, we're guessing. We did something the state and certainly the Governor Walker and his cronies didn't do. We hired the post office itself, which you can do, the licensee of the post office and the top 3 address verification experts in America that work for Google and Amazon and Home Depot, and I just had the experts go through name by name using 1,700 data points to make sure we knew exactly where each of these voters lived, and we called them, we sent them letters, and it confirmed it all. But unfortunately, the state, so the state, again, the state Board of Elections agrees with us. They do not want to purge these voters. The law says they must, but they're saying that federal law and their higher responsibility is you can't just remove people because someone said this black student has moved somewhere when they're standing right there and we're talking to them. We have them on camera.
So, Greg,
at their homes.
Let me just get this straight. The conservatives, the Republicans in Wisconsin who are suing before the Supreme Court, the Republicans in Wisconsin are saying that there's a couple 100,000 more or less, or over 100. It's in the neighborhood of 100,000 people, right?
Yeah, about 129,000.
Okay, so they're saying that 129,000 people in Wisconsin have moved out of state, and therefore
out of their city. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but they've moved. So why, if they've moved? I mean, when I moved here to Portland from Washington D.C., I didn't tell Washington D.C. that I had moved. My guess is I was probably on their voter rolls for another couple of years until they figured out I'd left town. But I didn't vote. What's the crisis? What's the problem with having people on your voting rolls who no longer live there? Why are the Republicans so freaked out? I mean, I get it. They're so freaked out about this because they want to steal the election. But how does that rationalization even hold up in a court of law?
Well, they're saying that they have a list called the Eric Movers List, which is not meant, by the way, the organization itself says this is not a purge list. This is just, it's a list of people who they think may have moved, but they mix a lot of Jose Garcias. They mix James Browns, so you get a lot of common minority names. And, students put in change of addresses temporarily for the summer, and they go, gotcha, we're going to remove you from the voter rolls. But so they're trying to come up with ways. They understand that students move dorm rooms and move locally. They understand that renters move around. And, of course, there's a confusion with African-American, Hispanic, and Asian-American names, which are in common. So if Jose Garcia moves out of Milwaukee, 3 other Jose Garcias are now in danger of losing their vote. It's like you say, it's crazy from a democracy view, not a democratic view,
from a logical point of view.
To say that let's say that there are, by the way, we did confirm that about 60,000, I'd say about 30% of the list are people who have moved and should re-register, fine. We've confirmed that. But you know what? Even keeping those few thousand on the voter rolls, they've never had a case in which someone is voting in Milwaukee after moving to Los Angeles. It's just completely nuts. And I don't know if you can get So it's nuts from a democracy view. It's brilliant from a Republican strategy view. Several states are using this gimmick, so that's why I went to Wisconsin. But today the Supreme Court there is going to hear it. And like I say, it's really unusual in that we have the government itself saying, palace numbers are correct. This list is junk. We can't use it. It's against federal law. It's even against Wisconsin law, which says you have to have reliable information, not Republican information. You understand the difference? There's Republican information. There's reliable information. And the commission, which is, by the way, bipartisan, the bipartisan commission says, no, we'd like reliable information. And what we did was we literally hired the post office as one of our consultants, which they didn't do. That is, the GOP didn't do. In fact, the guy bringing the suit, this is this right-wing organization backed by the billionaire right-wing Bradley family. This guy said, I said, you check the accuracy of the list? No. Did you hire the post office licensees required by law? No. Did you see that this is mostly African Americans and students? We did no demographic review. Of course they didn't, because they know the answer, and they know that that's also a violation of the remnants of the Voting Rights Act. It is screamingly Jim Crow. If you look at the maps that we have at gregpalast.com or at madison.com, which is the Capital Times, or you get the report, I mean, it's ugly. It's like a stain, right? It's like you see.
Greg, when are we going to hear the decision of the Wisconsin Supreme Court? We just have 20 seconds here.
Okay. Hopefully they'll say we're going to punt. We're not going to even deal with this until after the election. But the law does say these people have to be removed unless the court says we have a higher law and we can't remove legal voters. So it could be. And
the legislature is still Republican controlled, even though there's a Democratic governor. So they're not going to change the law, right?
They're not going to. They've gerrymandered themselves into permanent residents. Sick.
Amazing. Greg Palast, the great Greg Palast, gregpalast.com, the website. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast, and you can learn all about it over at his website. And his new book, How Trump Stole 2020. Check that out, too. Greg, thanks a lot for dropping by.
You're the best, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour. Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. I think we're going to have to, one of the questions I'd like to put on the table is if we're going to do a drinking game for tonight's debate, what are the words? Or should we, given the current state of things, we should bar drinking games altogether? Because I don't want to have, a bunch of people having, alcoholic liver disease as a consequence of Donald Trump's presidency, and I'm actually hearing from people in the medical field that that's happening, which is really not a good thing. But anyway, Lynn in El Segundo, California. Hey, Lynn, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Good to talk to you again. I wanted to let you know your reassurance earlier meant so much to me when you were sharing your faith that no matter how bad it gets, we can face the worst case scenario. We'll still be okay, because I find it hard to believe, but thank you for that. I'm calling because there's two well-kept secrets regarding special elections in the Senate. Mark Kelly of Arizona and Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock are running as Democrats, and if they win November 3rd, they could be installed in the Senate by November 30th. So that could change the balance of power significantly. And in my best case scenario, the Democrats fight to stretch out the nomination process, the hearing. And then it goes until these two get in, and then maybe that would give us some hope that we could not have her get the seat. But anyway, I'm just going to leave with that. Raphael Warnock in Georgia and Mark Kelly in Arizona. Let's support them. I found it interesting what you said about Wisconsin, because I right now have just finished writing 30 letters with an organization, voteriders.com, and I'm sending them to voters in in Wisconsin, to let them know the deadline to register or re-register is October 14th. So isn't it possible that if we reach out to the people that are so-called purged, that they could still vote if they re-register, if they get this information?
Depending on the state laws. There are some states where it's very difficult, New York being at the top of that list, and then there are other, or not at the top of the list, but in that list. And then there are other states where it's quite easy to re-register. In fact, in I think it's South Dakota or North Dakota, you don't even have to register. They have no voter registration rules. You just show up and say, here I am, and show some ID that shows that you're a citizen, that they're a resident, excuse me, and
that's what I see. And in Wisconsin, I have register online by October 14th, register at your municipal clerk's office by October 30th, or at the polls on election day. So I would hope that those people could still vote. Anyways, thank you for listening. You let me talk a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Lynn, and keep up the great work. I mean, what Lynn is doing is the extraordinary and important stuff that so many of us need to be doing. She's doing it by writing letters to people, writing postcards to people. There are other people who are doing phone banking. I mean, there's absolutely no shortage of things that you can do from home right now to dispel feelings of essentially political impotence. It's out of my hands. No, it's not out of your hands. You can do something about it. And there's some great organizations that are organizing this kind of stuff. I think Indivisible is probably the best, or one of the best, indivisible.org. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So there's a new paper out from Breakthrough, the National Center for Climate Restoration in Australia. This is one of these papers that, companies buy these things, governments buy them from these think tanks. This is done by a bunch of military experts. One of these guys actually was also the chairman of the Australian Coal Association and chief executive of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. The bottom line, and I'll just get to it real quick, even for 2 degrees Celsius warming, more than 1 billion people may need to be relocated. And in high-end scenarios, the scale of destruction is beyond our capacity to model, with a high likelihood of human civilization coming to an end. They do offer a solution. It's a radical Marshall-style program. You can check out the entire thing on our special, kind of members only, or for our supporters video over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out, get the whole thing. So check it out. So, drinking game for tonight's debate. Let's see. Every time I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. My apologies. Every time Donald Trump says Hunter Biden or China, every time Joe Biden says the deal is, I don't know. What would it be? It's going to be very, very interesting. So, anyway, Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind?
Yeah, every time he says Hunter Biden, they should talk about Ivanka and Jared. But my question is, okay, have they changed the laws in the states where if you're born in any state, you're an American, right?
Right.
Okay.
That's the 14th Amendment.
Once you're born, you also get a Social Security card. How come you
not automatically, but yes.
Right, within weeks or months or whatever. But
somebody has to apply for it. Maybe they're automatic now, but so your point is, why can't that be automatic voter registration?
You got it.
It is in most other countries. In most of the developed democracies in the world, your voter registration is just automatic. It comes with you being a citizen and being a taxpayer and all those kind of things. And it could be here in the United States. I think anybody who is male and remembers the 60s, knows how efficient the draft board can be at tracking you down. It should be equally easy to track down voters. In other words, to specify, okay, these people are voters. So, yeah, Steve's spot on. I'm totally with you. Thank you. Matt in Austin, Texas. Hey, Matt, what's up?
Yeah, I have a question. I have a bit of information. I've been studying on this Trump family, and I go back to the grandfather, Frederick Trump, and do you know a lot about him? Because here's something I found out. That he came to the United States, he went to the gold fields, he opened what they call a restaurant whorehouse. He got his money from that, he went back to Germany, he was then going to settle in Germany and be a rich man, but he was going to be charged with desertion in Germany. Right. So he came back to the United States. And the significant thing that I think is that he died during the Spanish flu in 1918. So now we have a guy whose grandfather was the foundation of his fortune, and he is just completely oblivious to people dying of the pandemic when his own grandfather died in the pandemic.
It's amazing, isn't it? It really,
think,
and his grandfather was a draft dodger who was facing prosecution in Germany for being a draft dodger, and Donald is a draft dodger.
Exactly why he left and came back to the States.
Right.
And then his mother,
it's amazing.
His mother took over. His mother took over Frederick Trump's business, his building business, and she carried that on until she handed it off to Fred Trump. And that's where this whole mess got started. And she was also very tight, and I don't know enough about her to tell you the truth, but I heard that she was she had that kind of Trump thing. She was
a grifter too?
Yeah.
It definitely seems to run in the family.
Pardon?
I said it definitely seems to run in the family. The thing that I'm waiting to hear is, and again, this is the kind of stuff that probably we'll hear a year from now, but now that the New York Times has shown that Donald Trump handed Ivanka $700 and some odd thousand, and Ivanka listed it as income, and he called it consulting fees, that's not a tax dodge per se, because she had to pay income taxes on the money. Although, you could argue that maybe he did it for tax purposes. And I'm not certain that that's even necessarily trying to get around the estate tax, passing money to your kids. My guess is that it was his way of giving money to Ivanka that he didn't want to have to give to Don Jr. and Eric. They're not getting consulting fees, and Ivanka is. And I think it's because she's the favorite kid, and he's trying to shovel cash to her. And I mean, he is paying, both of their significant others. He's paying Eric's wife $180,000 a year, and he's paying Don Jr.'s girlfriend, Kimberly Guilfoyle, $180,000 a year. For what? For being, sleeping with the Trump boys every night. I guess it's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it, and it's a well-paid job apparently. But. Yeah. But this goes all the way back to Grandpa Fred running a whorehouse in California or in Alaska or wherever it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's the other thing. Has anyone looked at or wanted to look at the taxes of these children who are running a business which should have been in a blind trust? So they're running a business for Donald Trump. I'd like to know what their taxes look like.
And Jared Kushner and the $1 billion that he successfully extracted from the Middle East after Qatar got blockaded by Saudi Arabia. And I believe it was on behalf of Jared Kushner. We don't know, but that's my opinion. Matt, thank you for the call. We'll be back. What's your drinking game for the night?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Or should we avoid that? We don't want too much liver damage. Maybe toking game? We'll be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, "Never again." Each time, "never again" had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price, indeed to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the 2 governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then, in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book defined Hitler.
The Hidden History of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. So it turns out So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson. And the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com.
Thank you.
So I just have to tell you an amazing story that I read during the break. Mark Sumner lays this out over at Daily Kos. This is not unique to me. This is where I got this. Although Mark is basically pulling together information from publicly available sources and talking about what's going on in Scotland right now. I have some good friends who live literally just down the road from Trump's Scottish property, his Turnberry property. In fact, we were talking on Skype about 3 weekends ago about it and the weird stuff that's going on there. But here's the game that Trump has been playing. I'll just make up numbers here for purposes of example. Let's say that Turnberry, Scotland is worth $100 million. So Trump says, okay, it's worth $100 million. Then the next year, and he declares that value and pays property taxes on it and everything, right? So $100 million. Then the next year he says, the value of this has gone up by 5%. It's now worth $105 million, which isn't how you would do a tax avoidance scheme, right? You would say, no, it's worth less. And in fact, that land in that part of Scotland is actually declining in value right now because the North Sea oil business is it absolutely sucks because demand for oil is down. So, but in any case, he says now it's worth $105 million, to use my made-up numbers. And then what he does is he loans himself $5 million and says, okay, I, Donald Trump, am now owed $5 million from Donald Trump. And he puts $5 million of cash into his checking account and then lives off it for a while. And he's been living on money like this for years. Which raises the question, where the hell did that cash come from? Where did he get the $5 million that he's saying, oh, well, the value of the property just went up $5 million, so I will loan myself $5 million. Where'd the money come from? Nobody knows. The best guess, and now the government of Scotland is investigating this, the best guess is that Trump is running a money laundering operation like mob bosses do. In other words, some oligarch, here's why money laundering is so important. You've got to have if you're going to spend money, you have to be able to show where it came from. Right? If I was to suddenly, buy $1 million house down the street here, and I don't have, and I can tell you, I don't have $1 million income. The IRS could legitimately come to me and say, "Where'd that money come from?" And if I couldn't answer that question, I'm guilty of money laundering. So it looks like this is what Trump is doing. That there's some oligarch someplace that wants to give him $5 million bucks, or maybe $50 million, and he's got to do this same little thing over 20 different properties. But somebody wants to give him $5 million. He sends his son over to their country. His sons have been traveling internationally like crazy lately. And, we're paying all the costs, of course, and all the security costs. So he sends one of his kids over to fill in the blank, and they come home with $5 million in cash. They give that money to Donald. Donald deposits it in the bank. The banker says, "Where'd this $5 million come from?" And Donald says, "I just loaned it to myself. I took it out of one of my accounts and I put it into another one of my accounts. I just loaned it to myself. Don't worry, it's all good. I loaned it to myself based on the increased value of my property in Scotland." And the bank goes, "Okay, cool," because they're happy to have $5 million in their bank, right? They're going to make money on that. They can loan out now $500 million. I think this is worse than a Ponzi scheme. I think Donald Trump is up to his eyeballs in stuff, and he never thought he'd get caught because he never thought he'd become president. I think he's up to his eyeballs in stuff that is that is worse than Bernie Madoff stuff. It's worse than Ponzi scheme stuff because it involves taking millions, probably over the course of years, hundreds of millions of dollars from foreign oligarchs. We'll see. But the piece that Mark wrote in the Daily Kos today is titled "Buried in Trump's Taxes. What's Going On at His Golf Resorts Makes No Sense Unless It's a Lie." And really, it's a problem. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Another great show. Thanks for taking my call. Tom, earlier in the show, you mentioned Jimmy Carter and Ronnie Reagan, and I think that's an apt reference for tonight's debate. As we know, Reagan, like Trump, was an unabashed liar, and it did present problems for President Carter.
He lied several times in that debate, although he got busted for it. But I'm not sure that it hurt him.
Yeah, because I think from what I read is Carter kind of just was very pedantic about it. So number one, I would say Biden can't just go high when Trump goes low. Joe needs to hit him back hard. And unlike Reagan in 1980, Tom, Trump hasn't actually had a 4-year record Biden can call him on. So, starting with over 200,000 dead from the virus, 30 million unemployed, and tens of millions food insecure. And just as important, if Biden isn't ready to embrace Medicare for all, he does need to affirm he wants to give health care to all Americans while Trump wants to strip it from everybody. And finally, Tom, as one of your recent callers said, build back greener, green new jobs for all. I think it should become a battle cry for Biden and Harris. Getting the base fired up, getting non-voters to vote, it'll turn this thing into a major landslide. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right, Jeff, and I think it's going to be a major landslide. I mean, we're seeing 8, 10, 12-point leads in a lot of states on the part of Biden, and well, we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, I don't want to engage in wishful thinking here, but I really think that Trump is absolutely right when he says basically that the only way he's going to win is through the courts or through Congress, because he's not going to win in the vote. He's going to lose this election. Jeff, like he lost the last one. But this is going to be far worse. Vicky in Glendale, California. Hey, Vicky, what's up?
Well, I think that voters need to really think about how it affects them that Trump and his buddies don't pay taxes. I sit around and look at my communities, and I see the interstate highways, the bridges crumbling. I see railroads that feed farmers that barely function. I see schools that are crumbling. And when we don't have those tax dollars that the rich are cheating us out of, that's when it affects us locally. And I think everybody ought to sit around their kitchen tables and think about what we could have, what America would look like if those people paid their taxes over 20 years. And I also want to talk a little bit about the tax bill. The tax bill that Trump just passed, the deduction that school teachers got was severely reduced for expenses. My daughters got about $200 worth of tax expense for their income tax, and they have put far more than that into their classrooms, especially now in the distance learning things. They've had to buy new computers. They can't tax that. They can't take that as a deduction, but Trump can have $70,000 worth of hairstyling, and his daughter? Give me a break. How is that affecting our communities? I think we really need to think about this as a kitchen table issue. So that's what I wanted to say. And I think it's important for people to think, how did that affect our lives? Not just...
Yeah, no, I agree, Vicki. I think spot on. You said it brilliantly. Thank you, and I appreciate that. Vivian in Fort Worth, Texas. Just a minute to the break. Vivian, got a quick one?
Yes, it's 3 parts. You're right that Trump is a grifter and a con man, but he's also a Klan, and they're leaving that out. A lot of people are leaving that out, but he is a Klan. Grew up in the Klan. Okay, he's giving our money to the riches and taking food stamps from poor people and lunches from poor schools from kids. They're calling they're calling Mitch Moscow Mitch because he's got an aluminum company being built in his company by the Russians. Y'all need to talk about it more because I'm only hearing this on 1 or 2 stations. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks, Vivian. Yeah, Moscow Mitch, absolutely, and he's taking money from these Russian oligarchs, and it's like it's not just Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump is obviously a grifter and a con man, and apparently a major international money launderer. I mean, that is becoming more and more apparent. But it's also Mitch McConnell. It's also basically the entire Republican Party that is still supportive of Donald Trump. They're all grifters. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is basically the deal they've made with Donald Trump. We'll let you keep being a grifter. You let us keep being grifters. Let's go. Let's do the grift. And welcome back. Mark in Framingham, Massachusetts. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I'm just a bit concerned that a lot of the mainstream media and mainstream politicians, due to movements like the Lincoln Project, are going to rehabilitate the pre-Trump Republican Party. Of course, I think Trump is an awful... of course, I think Trump's an awful president, but it's not like the GOP was nice. They were still, evolution denying, climate change denying, Trump is able to pay less than $1,000 in his taxes because of the neoliberal policies of the GOP. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I absolutely agree with you, Mark, and I've said that several times on this program that beware of the Lincoln Project. People are all enthusiastic. They do incredibly good ads. That, frankly, the Democratic Party should be doing, and they take no prisoners, which, frankly, the Democratic Party should be doing. I'm seeing these terrible, wimpy Joe Biden ads on TV that just make me cringe. And, Biden should be reaching out to his base rather than trying to reach out to white guys who voted for Trump. But that said, I think after the election, the Lincoln Project folks are going to use the credibility with Democratic voters that they got from doing these ads to start rolling out a series of ads talking about the national debt. And, we've got to get the debt under control. And how do you get the debt under control? Well, you privatize Social Security and you hand Medicare over to United Healthcare and, et cetera.
Even though the debt has traditionally increased under Republicans because they actually spend more money
massively.
in the military. Yeah.
Massively.
Yeah, and,
the last 2 presidents to have balanced budgets were Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton.
Yeah, and also I was hearing the other day that austerity programs actually cause the government to have to spend more money because more people go out of work, and they have to spend money on unemployment benefits. But one thing that I was noticing is that, so the current President Trump, he was born into a lot of money. He was expensively educated, but as far as we can tell, he knows nothing about politics. He cuts taxes for his rich cronies. All of that is also true to the last Republican president, George W. Bush. And the Republican president before that was his dad. So it's a party that favors, it's just a party that favors corruption. And I was wondering, do you think the Republican Party can ever become like the pre-neoliberal Eisenhower type where they actually valued things like Social Security and actually understood that there's some need for social programs? Or do you think the Republican Party is just never going to return to that?
I don't know, Mark. Whether it's going to fix itself or whether it's going to be replaced, I mean, there needs to be a place in American society for conservatives to go other than the Nazis, basically. And by conservatives, I'm not talking about the racists among us. I'm talking more about the people. What I was going to say William F. Buckley, but he was a flaming racist too. The question, I guess, is to what percentage of the whole former Republican base were only Republicans because of racism, and I'm increasingly thinking that number is probably 60 or 70%. My dad's Republicanism was, let's just be cautious. Let's move slowly. Let's think things through, which, if you're talking about race, is an excuse for not doing anything about race. So, which takes you back to racism. So I don't know, Mark. I just don't know.
Let's just work on making the Democratic Party a bit more progressive.
There you go. That's my project, too. Mark, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. On the science revolution this week, Trump never noticed a modern-day American disaster. He's trying to spread the virus as far and wide as possible. We should call this today what history will call it when it looks back on this moment, genocide. David Kraft with the Nuclear Energy Information Services here. It's time to end Exelon's nuclear hostage crisis. Climate risks are compounding financial challenges for Midwest nuclear plants. Plus, Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist II of Michigan drops by to explain that racism is a public health crisis. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Bill in Roanoke, Virginia. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, thank you for the soapbox this afternoon. I'll tell you what, we got to call it for what it is. It is the Trump virus. I think you pretty much encapsulated it when you talked about the defunding of the epidemiologists in Wuhan, China, prior to the epidemic. The scientists that were in southern China actually covering these bats that brought the virus to us. Mm-hmm. How about our naked stockpile? He threw out the playbook that Obama came up with that would have told him to restock the empty, depleted stockpile that we should have had. He had 3.5 years.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely, Bill. And what he did was he shut down the Office of Pandemic Response within the National Security Agency. He shut down the Office of Pandemic Response within Health and Human Services. And as you correctly point out, he stopped funding scientists who were in China who were looking at things. And this was all because of SARS. They were looking for, new emerging SARS-type viruses, which is exactly what this coronavirus is. Its official name is SARS-CoV-2. It's a SARS virus. But spot on, Bill. Spot on. Thank you. Bob in Long Island, New York. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Yeah, how you doing? Look, this whole thing with Trump and his taxes, don't you think the IRS has people who are aware of this and have either been paid off to say nothing? The IRS is partially responsible for this. They have an obligation to turn that tax return over to the people.
I'm with you, Bob, but you will recall there was, I don't remember the exact details, but there was something very strange about Trump getting the head of the IRS, the commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, appointed. And there was some weird legal jujitsu that he had to do with Mitch McConnell in order to get this one particular guy as the head of the IRS. And I need to go back and track that down because it's been a couple of years. But there's something stinky going on there. Bob, thanks a lot for the call. I'm with you. Russ in Fort Myers, Florida. Hey, Russ, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? Listen, we're all sitting on our edge of the seats going to watch the show tonight. I was talking with my wife the other day, and it kind of came out of my mouth, and I wanted to share that with your client, your audience.
Listen.
That is, white lies matter. Did you get that?
Yeah. Although I'd say that the lies that Trump is telling are not white lies. They go way beyond that.
No.
He's telling lies that are killing people.
That the white man's been saying for 30, 50, 60, 100 years.
Oh, I get it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
White lies, not black lies, white lies. The white lies we've been telling.
Okay. Well, they both matter. I'm with you. Okay. Yeah, it's a good one, Russ. Thank you. That's a good one. Zach in Topeka, Kansas. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Isn't this more with the taxes just kind of basic property rights in the sense that you're not paying for, 1%'s not paying for government. Why should they have a say? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
It's a good question. It's kind of a variation on the logic that men shouldn't be allowed to vote on whether or not abortion is legal. Similarly, billionaires who don't pay taxes should not be able to insert themselves in political processes that have to do with what their taxes will be. I'm totally with you, Zach. Totally with you. Margie in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. Hey, Margie, what's up?
Hey, regarding Greg Palast, who I love, but I wish he would include some information about Wisconsin. We have same-day voter registration. All of these people who are being thrown off the voter rolls, they can still vote. And that information has to be included because otherwise people are going to think they're ineligible to vote. You can literally show up to the poll, give them the information they need, verifying your address. You can register and walk over to the next table and vote. These people can vote.
Right. So don't be discouraged and don't let the termites get you down here. I'm with you, Margie. Thank you for adding that to that. And if we discuss it again, I'll be sure to add it in. Bill in Westchester, Illinois. Hey, Bill. Last minute. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Just real quick, you've been discussing taxes in the debates tonight. Donald Trump wrote off over $250,000 to porn stars, and Michael Cohen got the checks. So it's just something people can understand that real quick.
Well, he wrote it off. He didn't write it. I mean, there's no line item deduction that the IRS allows for paying off porn star mistresses. But what he did, there is a line item deduction for paying your lawyer. And so Trump wrote this off as a legal expense, which is a crime. It's tax fraud. And it's right there for all of us to see. And Michael Cohen got 30 months in prison for tax fraud, for income tax fraud. And and by the way, he went to prison for committing income tax fraud, and this was paying off Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal on behalf of Donald Trump. And it's like, when did we forget that part of it? Bill, thank you. And thank you for being with us today. I hope you have an opportunity to watch or listen to the debates tonight. They're going to be fascinating. And, we will be processing it. First hour tomorrow, second hour tomorrow. Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us to pick up your calls and, all that sort of stuff. So have a great evening. If you do a drinking game, be very careful, please. Be good to yourself and people around you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CarShield, America's #1 auto protection company. More information at carshield.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowl, B-O-L-L, and branch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And TEEF, T-E-E-F, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teefhealth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!